All right, guys. Well, the big fight happening this weekend. There is only one guest who could use his fantastic analysis to break this down. You know him from both Morning Combat, the Luke Thomas Show on SiriusXM, and of course his very own live chat. He is kind enough to jump on and help us preview UFC 247 Jones versus Reyes from his wife's office. You see the gold-plated record in the back. It is Luke Thomas himself. Welcome back to Submission Radio, Luke. It's great to have you. How are you today, man?
Thanks. I'm tired of shit. But I'll tell you this, though. You guys, speaking of the live chat, you might recognize these double doors from, like, one of the original iterations. So what ended up happening is you can't see here, but you hear that? We put a wall here. Mm-hmm. And so our bedroom is now here. My wife's office is here. And I took the old bedroom as my office. So I've got some memories up here. It's her office now, but I've done some dirty work up here as well.
Dirty work? I love it. There's some bodies hanging around. I didn't want to say it, but I was getting nostalgic just looking at those double doors. I'm like, oh, man, the memories. Can Barber still run around and run amok, or is the wall prohibiting him from doing that now?
Yeah, that little dirtbag was here just a minute ago. There's a door here. I mean, it's a wall, but it's a door as well. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, the dog, I mean, we've tried to keep it out when we go to bed, but he won't. He just howls, so Barbara sleeps with us every night. We're obviously, disgusting people, so the dog sleeps with us.
No, we're very much the same, man. The dog is as much of a part of the live chat as anything else these days. But obviously there is a lot to talk about, Luke, at UFC 247. This pretty interesting matchup between Jon Jones and Dominick Reyes. So just to kick things off, I'm wondering, with Dominick Reyes, what would you say are his biggest threats and challenges that he presents to Jon Jones? I know obviously Jon Jones is the heavy favorite, as he always is, but I feel like people are kind of sleeping on Reyes a little bit in this one.
Well, I went back and looked at the odds. Actually, Thiago Santos was a bigger underdog than Reyes is. I think the odds makers are right. The odds makers have it roughly the same as the Anthony Smith one. So you're right. Don't get me wrong. He's still obviously a big underdog. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I did some of this for Dissected yesterday. On the ground, one never knows, because sometimes everything you see on tape is exactly what you're going to end up getting in a fight. A lot of times when the guys are in their mid to late 20s, they're still evolving, so they can show new wrinkles. But insofar as what the tape shows, Reyes does not appear to be any kind of a threat to Jon related to the wrestling. He's got really poor takedown percentage. I think it's in the teens, 16%. And, while Jon is about 50% on his takedowns, so is Khabib, right? I mean, that doesn't necessarily tell you a whole lot, and we all know the strength of his wrestling. So to me, it's like I don't see him as a takedown threat. Now, as a takedown defense for Dominick Reyes, what I would call his first order of defense, which is your immediate down blocking, your immediate underhooking, that kind of stuff, he's not that great. But what he actually is really good at is once someone like wraps him up and takes him down, he never consents to the position. He doesn't try to play guard. He's immediately scooting his hips out, trying to get to his base, trying to get his hips to face the mat, get an elbow, get a hand, get his back against the fence. And from there, he's really, really good. So you might see someone pick him up and slam him. You might see someone grab him to the ground. But Oezdemir did it. Weidman did it. Some other ones have done it, but he gets right back up. So that might be an interesting challenge for Jon. Does he go for the takedown, and how much does he want to spend in terms of energy to keep this guy down? That's going to be one thing to watch. Really, to me, where this comes down to is who is the bull and who is the matador? If you go back to the first Gustafsson fight, Jon was the bull and Gustafsson was the matador. And obviously that was very competitive. The relationship was reversed in the rematch, same as it is for the two Cormier fights. Cormier walked him down. I think Jon's really good at absorbing pressure. And so with that single shot high variance he does, where he throws a strike here and then a strike here and then a strike here and then a strike here, and then he's changing the distance, he's changing the look, he's changing the rhythm. He can be really hard to get a beat on as people are moving into him, and he's very accurate, right? That kind of a thing. Another thing is Jon Jones has great defense, right? He has a 65% defense rate. I mean, that means 2 out of every 3 shots someone throws at him doesn't land. That's a lot of people not making contact. But for Reyes, to me, where he really excels is kind of where Jon Jones excels. A lot of people press into Dominick and try to get him to go backwards. He's very good, as I mentioned, in terms of takedown defense, getting up off the fence, getting up quickly, and then getting off the fence quickly. When people try to corner him against the fence in the striking department, he's very good about keeping his feet movement, never getting off there when they press him. He's got good clinch break skills. And as you guys saw in the Weidman fights and then the Cannonier fights, He's got good uppercuts, good straights. He's got good cut kicks against orthodox stance fighters. So to me, if John Jones is being pressed by Reyes, that's going to – I mean, John's the favorite probably in every dimension. I'm just thinking, like, in what context is Reyes the most dangerous? To me, he's the most dangerous when people are pressing into him. He's got really good, accurate left hands with a variety of different shots. The thing that's interesting about it is while Reyes has good defensive awareness when he is being pushed, he doesn't do a lot of cage cutting when he's the offensive guy. He doesn't like cut it off to narrow someone's options. So if he's pressing into John and he's not cutting him off and he's giving John space to move, and John's good at that kind of thing anyway, it's going to be a really tough fight for him. So let's see who's the bull, who's the matador.
When we're looking at leg kicks here, obviously Santos had some success kicking John's legs, and John kind of said it's an area where he's going to look at and try and fix going into his future fights. But I'm just wondering, in terms of leg kicks, there's this theory. I was talking to fighters about this at a bunch of gyms here in Australia. Some fighters believe guys with bony legs, skinny legs, they're better to leg kick, and others believe those are the most painful, brutal, hardest guys to kick in the gym, hardest guys to fight. They would much prefer kicking a guy with a bunch of meat on his leg. I'm just wondering, do you believe that at this point maybe John's legs being so skinny could also be a bit of a detriment to someone trying to kick him?
Well, it depends what stance John is in. So one of the favorite kicks that Reyes likes to go to is when you see guys in the open stance, right, where it's one southpaw versus one orthodox versus two orthodox or two southpaw, so it creates like a V. That means that each guy's lead leg is right in front of the other one. When you kick across with your back leg, it's actually usually really easy to check, right? Because if you're swinging your back left leg into their front left leg, right, opposite stance, they can just turn the knee over and your shin gets checked immediately. It's actually kind of risky to just throw it sometimes. Reyes typically waits until that person tries to get lead outside foot position. And then when they take it, he's got enough distance to cover at an angle where they can't quite get the knee inside to check. So he actually does it really quite cleverly. Outside of that, he doesn't throw them that much. In terms of like your physical dimensions, that's a little bit above my pay grade. I don't actually know I'm guessing it kind of depends on it's going to depend on the kicker. It's going to depend on the context. It's going to depend on who's being kicked. Yes, meaty versus not meaty. But here's my point. Two people of a similar build might fight somebody who is skinny, and one might come back and say, wow, it really hurt. The other person was like, I had no problems, in part because when did you choose to throw them? In what context? How hard? Were you setting up something behind it, or were those just intended to be punishing? So it's all really a function of like, what's the context in which they're being used? How are they being set up? Are they accompanied by other strikes? How much do you rely on them? It could be a lot of different factors. I'll just say Reyes is not a heavy leg kicker anyway, which isn't to say he won't go to it this time, but it has not been historically a big part of his game. So while you should look for it, I'm not expecting that necessarily. I could be completely wrong, but I'm not expecting. The tape does not show that that's a imminent threat. I'll put it that way.
Because I'm just wondering if John does plug up that hole. He's got that wide stance that he uses in his fights. And I'm just trying to think of a John Jones that tries to deal with not being so open for leg kicks. I mean, do you think, what would that look like if you had to sort of imagine him plugging up the hole? Is he switching stances more often during his fights? Is he not deploying these long stances as he's pushing guys up against the fence? And in that case, could it maybe even work out to be more of an advantage for the opponent because other holes get opened?
Yeah, so usually when Reyes does that cut kick across like that, which is his favorite leg kick, it's typically not the only one he uses, but the one he goes to. It's when he's absorbing pressure. This is what I mean. The game is going to be really interesting to pay attention to. If Reyes is pressing into John and John is standing, let's see, he's standing southpaw with him, well, then that means Reyes is going to be going to the jab, less so on the leg kick. But then John can slip the jab and, any number of different attacks behind it. If they're both standing opposite stands and now John is pressing into him, well, now all those other conditions are relevant. So again, it's like biologically, is there any reason to think it's prohibitive in terms of pain for the kicker to kick John Jones's legs? Not really. It's just the issue is a lot of times what's happening is he's being backed up. and he likes it. I think he likes it. I mean, I think he likes it either way for different reasons, but he's really good at absorbing pressure. He's very good at it. And then when he needs to, he's really good about selectively, pressing people against the fence like he did, or on the ground. Anthony Smith, or in his last case, it wasn't particularly exciting, but it was effective for the most part anyway, against Thiago Santos. So to me, it's like it was the same thing with Conor and Cowboy. It's always like a function of, what are you looking for? What's the context? What are they trying to set up? What is it? Who's doing what to the other one? This one, the bull and the matador equation is going to set up all different kinds of offense and defensive responsibilities, I think, both directions.
If we're talking about sort of intangibles, Luke, you look at the fact that Dominick Reyes is going to this fight undefeated, and obviously you sort of look at fighters who have taken losses and they've obviously fixed a lot of things in their game, and that can lead to them improving. But at the same time, guys who are undefeated, they've never tasted defeat, and sometimes they can be a little bit more confident maybe because they don't know what it's like to, say, lose or be knocked out or anything like that. Do you think that's a potential helpful factor going in against Jon Jones, a guy who often sort of we see guys crumble very early in the fights, and they seem sort of frozen when things aren't really going their way? And I'm just wondering, why do you think so many fighters who go in against Jon Jones with a ton of confidence and obviously a solid game plan and preparation just seem to get frozen and aren't really able to sort of do anything against Jon Jones?
It's so funny, man. When I was making this point right before the second Gustafsson fight, and obviously, we all know the story about the second Gustafsson fight. All the circumstances around it were a shit show in every direction, and I understand that. But it's like, I don't know how to explain this to people. There's a lot of times where you can see somebody who's not on, and again, PEDs affect everybody differently. But, let's even use TRT. Because again, the PEDs, it's like, what do you need them to do for you? How old are you? Have you used them before? Have you not? There's a lot of questions about what kind of benefit you can derive from them. Obviously, they do enhance performance, but in different ways for different people. I'm pointing out something. In people you've seen get on and off TRT, you have seen sometimes they really benefited from it from like a physique standpoint, or it really aided what they were naturally good at that maybe they couldn't pull off in a sustained way over time. Like, for Vitor Belfort, like people are like, oh, he dropped off completely off of TRT. Well, sort of. I mean, the answer is yes, he did. But the truth is, for the first 3 minutes of a fight, he looked pretty good. I mean, there was a physique change, but in terms of the danger of his hand speed, it was still there. Now, at 3 minutes of one round is not much of a fight. But the point being is, for that little pocket, he looked really good. He looked dangerous. It's just after that, things kind of went away. You could sort of see the difference there. My point being is, that's got very little to do with fight IQ, right? Decision-making ability. I'm not saying there's no way that could be aided by certain kinds of drugs or certain kinds of regimens. I think they could. And I'm also not accusing Jon of things that I don't have no proof that he's done. I'm simply saying, let's assume you're a cynic. And let's assume you think Jon's done everything he's accused of. What can you infer about his fight IQ? I think even if you're that person and you adopt that position, dude, Jon Jones has the best fight IQ of anyone I've ever seen. Period, dude. And I'm his best friend, and everyone knows this, but I don't know how you can look at the tape and conclude otherwise. I'm being serious. Like, how do you watch the decisions that this guy makes and the things he looks at in someone's game and then just takes from you round over round? You're talking about why guys are frustrated. Well, here's why guys are frustrated. They have game plans, then they have backups to the game plans, and they can't get either of them going. He just takes it away from them. He looks at exactly what they want to do, and he removes the conditions under which they're good. People are always like, oh, he fights them at their strength. Sort of. Sometimes he does that. That's true. Sometimes he takes it as a head-on challenge, and he does. More commonly, what he does is he takes away the conditions that enable you to be at your best. I mean, it might look like it because it might have a similar kind of context, but key ingredients are often missing because he's sharp as a tack when it comes to that kind of a thing. And so that's why when these fights, and he's had a lot of fights since the Rashad Evans fight who have gone 5 rounds. That's why these guys are deflated. They're like, dude, he took away my A weapon, my B weapon, and my C weapon's not very good anyway. Because they're like, what else am I supposed to do? I mean, maybe they can survive the full freight of the 5 rounds, but they can't do much else. So this is the real test of Dominick Cruz. And this is, I like the question because do I think that the fact that he's undefeated is going to help him? Yes. And you could say, oh, he's not undefeated. He should have lost the Oezdemir fight. Exactly. That was a wake-up call for him to get even better. Because he said he was not planning on Oezdemir taking him down. He was very surprised by it. and it kind of threw him off. Well, he knows that John Jones got good wrestling and good striking and good everything else. It almost serves as a loss without it going on your record. On the other hand, he's never been in a situation where plan A and plan B didn't work, and now you got to figure out something to get it to do. So we're going to see the adaptability of, assuming it goes long, of Dominick Reyes. We know about the adaptability of John Jones. It's up here. We're going to find out exactly where Dominick Reyes is if it goes past the second or third.
Well, I was going to say, like, John Jones, the longer the fight goes, he really gets a feel for his opponents, as you sort of mentioned and broke down. Do you think in that sense the first round is probably Dominick's best chance? And also, we've seen Dominick sort of get a little bit tired in fights as well. So I feel like if it's going to happen, the first round is probably where he has the most chance.
Yeah, I think you got to jump out to you can't get wrecked. I mean, this is why it's such a very difficult puzzle to solve, because you got to jump out to an early lead, but you can't get reckless. I mean, it reminds me of Mayweather, right? Mayweather, let's say you got a 12-round fight with Mayweather. You know, the first 6 rounds are the ones where you got to do your best work, dude, because rounds 7 through 12, he already knows what you're going to do. He's not going to give any of the things that you need to do well back to you. And so you're like, well, shit, I gotta put some of these rounds in the bank, because by this time I might come up short, or I need to be able to change things up a completely different way. John is very, very similar in that regard. Obviously different games and different sports, but there's a little bit of an overlap there. So yeah, I think that's the case. The other thing I would say is that there's a vulnerability with John in the first Cormier fight and in the first Gustafsson fight. Fight Metric told me this. I don't know about the Santos fight. I have to go look at that. Although in the Santos fight, John had, for a 5-round fight, record low output. That's kind of why the fight was boring, because he was super careful, right? So we're also going to see if he's kind of careful in this one. But the point being is, in the first Gustafsson and the first Cormier fights, the one that were kind of close, maybe you think Gustafsson won, those were the only fights where they had an opponent either match him or exceed him in boxing shots landed, in punches landed to the body and to the head. You got to stay on rhythm with him. Like, a lot of times what happens is guys try to figure him out, and then they give up a couple of rounds because he's got that single shot variance, right, where he's not throwing John's not a combination thrower. I mean, he might throw one here or there, but in general he's defined by trickery, by sleight of hand, by one's here, you're looking there, it's coming this way, right? It's all different kinds of stuff. So the point being is, when you're looking at this for Dominick, he's going to have to figure out a game plan to establish an early lead. I think boxing with him to a degree, obviously I think also Dominick's a naturally good kicker, but he's got to get in his face, but without being aggressive to the point where he's letting the matador instincts of John do the work that he needs to do. So it's like, wow, you got to lead, you got to get ahead with strikes, but also if you do lead, John's really good about making you pay for that. So good luck, Dom.
Yeah.
It's a tough nut to crack.
Well, while you talk about trickery, one thing that Dom does have is that great left hand that goes down the pipe that he doesn't really telegraph, and he can throw it when guys are moving forwards on him, and he can throw it off an angle. Obviously, Greg Jackson, obviously Coach Wink are preparing for that shot. They're getting ready for it. But we know John does like to dictate people towards the fence, and I suppose there will be opportunities for him to possibly throw that shot. Do you believe he'll be able to successfully use this technique in this fight because John likes to push guys up against the fence so much? Or do you believe John and the team already have some stuff prepared for this one?
Yeah, I mean, the answer might be both, I think. Again, it's going to depend on who's doing what to the other in terms of leading the dance. But let's talk about the context you had just asked about there. Let's say it's late fourth, and maybe Dom was trying to be the bull the first 2 rounds, and now he's fading, and maybe John detects it, so he wants to press into him. The one thing I've seen, I mentioned John's got, extremely good defense. However, from striking, the one area where he's had a little bit of an issue has been, and he's never had to pay for it. So you're like, well, how big of an issue could it be? Well, I guess so far, not very. It's just something I always see, and I'm always like, nothing happened. But, each subsequent time it happens, you're like, is the balloon going to pop? He'll get in the clinch with someone and get, and I'm going to put it in air quotes here, a little lazy, because he's not actually being lazy. But what I'm saying is he gets really relaxed in there because he likes to operate from there. He likes to throw elbows and maybe he goes for a takedown. He did foot sweeps against Rashad. He did foot sweeps against Anthony Smith, all from that clinch position, so he likes that kind of stuff. but I've seen guys fire uppercuts up the middle there and bop his head back.
Yeah.
Cormier did it a bunch of times. Well, dude, Dominick Reyes has lights out accuracy with some of his punches. He's got a good rear hand uppercut and a lead hand uppercut. Those are the ones that dropped Jared Cannonier both times. And he can do it sliding in the pocket as well. Dude, that's a real threat, man. So this is my point. It's like, man, if John is firing on all cylinders and he's defensively responsible, you just look at what Dominick Reyes can do, and people are like, oh, he's a scrub. He is so not a scrub. He's an excellent talent, but he's up against it, right? If John is doing the things that we know John can do, it's just hard to see a clear path for him. On the other hand, as the fight goes longer and John might make a defensive lapse here or there, Dominick Reyes is absolutely the kind of person who's going to make you pay for it. He's going to make you pay for it in dramatic, quick, and painful ways. So, yeah, I want to see exactly about what happens. Because I mentioned before, what's John good at? Absorbing pressure. He can deliver it too. Well, Reyes is not that great at applying pressure, but he is awesome at absorbing it. He's got a lot of practice with it, and he has shown people pushing behind those two black lines, and they all of a sudden think they're in the command position, and then he pops them with a shot, whether it's Weidman, Oezdemir, Kimball, OSP, or anybody else you want to name. I think I said Cannonier already. And then they go crumbling to the ground because he's really good at either a left straight, as you indicated, or the uppercut. So this is what I mean. John's got to be careful here on his P's and Q's, and he probably will be, but I'm going to be watching for that.
And you mentioned all the guys that Reyes went through, an impressive list of guys, but you also look at it from the sense of, this is a guy that hasn't been doing it nearly as long as what John Jones has, and he's been in the game not that long. I'm just wondering, is it too soon for Reyes? Do you think this has come too soon for him, even though he's on an amazing win streak, and obviously you can't deny the fact that he deserves this title shot? Would it have benefited him to have a few more fights and fine-tune his game a little bit for Jones to get a little bit, maybe a little bit older, a little bit slower? Or do you think maybe the time is now, while his, I suppose, self-belief and sort of belief in his technique is the highest right now?
I'm generally in favor of it, but I recognize that there are some other circumstances that could be better. So, like, for example, what's one thing that's like just categorically missing from Reyes's catalog? Now, they put him in a fight for it to happen, but it didn't, which is he's never gone 4 or 5 rounds. I don't think in MMA, and certainly not in the UFC. It's a bit like Zabit Magomedsharipov, where it's like, dude, you're obviously talented, but we got to see you put through the paces here a little bit. Well, we've seen John in a gazillion of those fights. John's average fight time is longer than 15 minutes. So in other words, his average fight time goes into the 4th round. That's his average at this point, right? So he's built for the long haul and understands the strategy about what happens if you're down a couple heading into the 4th and 5th. Like, he already knows what he's up against and what he has to do. That's all brand new territory for Dominick. He's never done it once. They tried to do it with Weidman, and he knocked him out. That's awesome. It's great to get a first-round stoppage. You don't get paid by the hour, as they say. But at the same time, when you're up against it, how do you respond? And the answer is, we don't know. He doesn't know. Nobody knows. So that can't be all that great. On the other hand, the thing that I just like about it all is, man, when John came back after the 214 win, because he had that second suspension, and then he came back and he's like, I'm going to show up, I'm going to be active, and I'm going to put the title up for grabs. Dude, I really respect that from John Jones. I really, really do. He didn't have to give a title shot. I mean, you could make the case that maybe Anthony Smith was or wasn't deserving. I think he was, but I recognize it wasn't the most overwhelming case. And Thiago Santos, another middleweight who had come up, and here's the guy that everyone's saying, oh, this guy was a school teacher, an IT repairman, and what does all this mean? Dude, you know what it is? It's the champion standing out there and saying, anyone who wants it, just walk up, do a little bit of what you got to do, and I'll give it to you. I'll make sure that I'm not going to be one of these champions who hides behind the belts, who doesn't do anything. You guys won't know this name, but Showtime is putting on a fight in boxing this weekend between Gary Russell Jr. and this Mongolian guy who's an Olympic silver medalist. And Gary Russell Jr. only fights the mandatory fight once a year just to keep his belt. John Jones doesn't do that. He goes out there and gives it to everybody who thinks they're the next hot shit. I love that. I love everything about that. Now, maybe after this one, it might be time to think about Adesanya or Miocic if he emerges victorious. But I recognize it's not ideal. On the other hand, So many people are like, I'm not fighting that guy. I'm not fighting that guy. I'm not fighting that guy. That guy's ranked below me. This guy's will do anything for my name. John's like, you think this pay-per-view is going to make John a ton of money? I mean, it'll make him a ton of money because he makes a ton of money, but like relative to like the Cormier or Gustafsson or most of his, you think this is going to make him a bunch of money? No, it's not. But he just took the fight anyway. You know, I really respect that.
100%. And going back to before, I heard Stephen A. Smith didn't learn a damn thing about that Weidman win from Dominick Reyes. But I was...
It's only, just a couple of minutes. What do you learn in a couple of minutes? Nothing.
By the way, I love your breakdown of that. It's almost 30 minutes long, and the time flew by. I've never seen you so passionate and excited, Luke. Motherfucker, you're standing next to Joe Rogan. It was one of the most hilarious things I've seen in a long time. Anyone who hasn't watched that video on Luke's channel, I urge you guys to check it out. But just you mentioned Miocic and Adesanya, and I want to quickly ask you about those in a second. But just with the Santos fight with John Jones, the perception after that fight and the narrative was like, man, John Jones just didn't look himself. He looked a little bit, bored, or he's losing a step, or he's maybe exiting his prime. People were bringing USADA, into the whole narrative. And what's your theory on that? Do you think it's just a case of Santos being such a dangerous guy? And do you think the way that fight played out and the way people perceive John Jones afterwards will have any effect on how John Jones fights in this fight?
So I actually think it's a fair question. By the way, I know Jeff Nowitzki was promoting like, oh, John, between the CSAC and the NSAC and USADA, he's been tested 42 times in a calendar year. Well, researchers at the University of Adelaide, near where you guys live,
oh, wow,
at least relative to me anyway,
yeah,
have shown that in order for testing by itself to both catch and deter effectively, it'd have to be almost every day. So 42 is certainly a significant amount, but doesn't match what the research shows to be effective. Number two, I just find that a hilarious statement. It's like, dude, the only reason that he's being tested 42 times is one, because obviously John brings some of this problems on himself. Two, the science behind why you're testing him is shit, right? I mean, you don't actually know what the pulsing is. They have a hypothesis. They don't actually know. They legitimately do not know. And sort of keep an eye on him, essentially, is what this is, because they don't know what's happening. So your science is shit. And two, because he has no rights relative to any other professional athlete who has a collective bargaining agreement. It's like, hey, you see this guy? All right, he's a bit of a, he screws up sometimes, but also he's got no rights and our science is bad. Here's 42 numbers. It's like, why would you brag? It's just crazy to me. Okay. But the question you asked was obviously a little bit different. I don't think it's an unfair question. USADA or otherwise, I don't know. But, dude, he got started fighting at like 1920. Well, he's 32. He'll be 33, I think, in July or so. Yeah, that's a completely fair question. If you get into the fight game earlier, USADA or no USADA, you're in all likelihood, you're going to get out earlier as well. And it's hard to know whether his last two fights indicate, boredom, a GSP kind of thing where you're like, okay, I've built this empire of greatness. I don't want to waste it by taking a risk in this particular fight. So let me just say if it could be that too. But here's what I'll say. I don't think the question about whether or not age and or decline is irrelevant. It's a question. We'll get another step closer to answering that on Saturday, but it's not an unfair line of inquiry. We don't know the answer, but we need to keep an eye on it until we have a more definitive conclusion to draw.
Well, let's look at this Adesanya-Jones feud that's been going on. Obviously, Adesanya on Submission Radio 200 last week talking about how if Jones moves up to heavyweight, he'll go up to heavyweight. He'll fight Jones at heavyweight. We know the guys at City Kickboxing, they have a different mentality when it comes to fighting. A lot of really cool theories over there in that gym. And obviously Adesanya has a lot of stuff to do at middleweight before he does that. We've got guys like Paulo Costa, we got Yoel Romero, we got, possibly Cannonier or Darren Till. But let's say that all happens. Is that a fight that you're interested in? Would you give Adesanya a chance against John Jones?
Yeah, I would. So I mentioned the odds with this fight, how it matches sort of what the Smith fight was. Adesanya versus Jones in the odds makers is nearly a pick'em. Slight, I think it was like minus 125 for John, minus 105 for Izzy. Yeah, that's competitive. I absolutely give him a try and a chance. Now, there's a lot of different factors here, right? So I've been thinking, what if he goes in there and just demolishes Dominick Reyes? what fight becomes more likely, the Adesanya or the Miocic fight? You probably think, well, maybe Miocic, because at that point people will say everyone his weight and below him has no chance. Miocic is big at heavyweight. That could be like a new X factor. I mean, I don't know if that's what people are going to say, but that's what I'm thinking. Whereas if he looks somewhat vulnerable against Dominic, let's say he wins, but it's competitive, people might say, dude, this is the perfect time to make the Adesanya fight because now it's really competitive, given the size differential. I would say this. Let's see how he looks against Dominic. Let's see. I really want to see the wrestling here because, as I mentioned, Dominic, I do not think is a takedown threat to John. We'll see, but the history does not show that. He does have, again, he's really wiggly underneath. He likes to move and get up. That part's going to be kind of interesting to me because if Dominic is able, because you saw good takedown defense of Anthony Smith. I think you saw, I have to go back and look at what Thiago Santos did, but I don't recall him even injured, necessarily being threatened with a takedown a whole lot. I could be wrong about that. I have to go back and check. But I remember Anthony Smith got taken down, but there was a lot of times he stuffed it when I thought he was never going to. And Izzy is just a marvel where, he's, like John Jones. This is why Izzy and John clash, and they don't ever want to admit this. They're kind of similar, I mean, Izzy's got his own ideas about the world, and he's got this totally unique energy, and he comes from a completely different part. And John is, all involved in religion, and, he's got his own background. It's completely different. But I think they see a little bit of themselves in the other because John is smart as shit and Adesanya is smart as shit. And both of those guys get good at the game quickly. I mean, Adesanya, if he goes in there and blows the doors off Romero, and John looks good, but maybe a little bit shaky at times against Reyes, how could you not conclude that that Adesanya could make up enough difference in the wrestling department and the distance management department to give John fits? He obviously could. So yes, the concerns about John's size and wrestling prowess are well taken. But if there is any sort of a drop-off in his game, it's not that Adesanya doesn't have good takedown defense. You're just talking about one of the best fighters, if not the best fighter ever. Yeah, he might need some age-related decline or other forms in order for that to be a little bit more competitive. But I on the feet, I think Adesanya tears him to pieces. So we'll have to see how it looks. This is why this Reyes fight, to me, everyone's like, oh, I don't think it's all that great. Well, first of all, I take Dominick Reyes very seriously. 2, there's nothing harder than defending your title continuously in the UFC. No one thought Tim Elliott had a shot against Demetrius Johnson. Look how competitive that was. Yeah. And 3, the stakes are enormous here. An Adesanya fight, a Miocic fight, or maybe if he loses the end of the reign of John Jones, that's a big deal if you ask me. So I don't know. I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, appreciate the time, Luke. We'll let you go in just a second, but maybe end on this. Just sort of on Adesanya and John Jones. You notice, obviously, John Jones, a lot of times he likes to fight in his opponent's strengths, right? Like Glover Teixeira, Thiago Santos, happy to stand with him, even though people were like, why don't you just take him down and finish them quickly? With Adesanya, very often John Jones, when asked about it, is quick to point out, like, if I took him down or if I took his ass down or, basically showing this wrestling advantage. Do you think that if they fought, John Jones would fight the same and sort of have that ego sense where he wants to beat Adesanya where he is best in the striking? Or do you think that this would be another case or a rare case where John Jones would just go to his strength straight away and try and take him down?
I think John would stand with him for intervals, right? Because John is not some helpless lamb led to the slaughter on his feet. But over time, right? I mean, let's say, okay, how about this? The Robert Whittaker fight. Why didn't he wrestle Adesanya? I don't know. Probably because he thought his striking was better. And he had moments in the fight. I mean, he landed on Adesanya. But over the course of a round and a half of continuous standing, that's just too much time for Izzy. You can't do that with him. If John gives Adesanya 3 rounds standing, I feel like that's a very bad idea. But if he gives himself, a minute and a half here and then wrestling, 30 seconds here, wrestling, a minute here, wrestling, that actually seems to be like a very potent weapon that you could use. Or maybe the wrestling is sufficient where he doesn't need to do a whole lot else. So my point is this. John, to me, as I said it before, Adesanya is brilliant. John has incredible fight IQ. They both know it about the other guy. John would be making, I think, a cataclysmic mistake by trying to just stand with Adesanya for the better part of however long that fight lasts. but I do think he can stand with him for enough time to be competitive in spots, and then mixing it up with his. I mean, that's the other part. It's like if he gets Adesanya down and then can credibly establish a wrestling threat with fakes and feints and then actual attempts, that's going to limit Adesanya's striking, which is going to enhance John's striking. Well, now it's like Frankie Edgar. When Frankie Edgar can establish the takedown, his striking is so much better. But against Holloway, against Aldo, he couldn't get the takedown right. Then his striking becomes much more manageable. So to me, it's not, I mean, obviously Frankie and John have completely different games, but it's a similar concept. If you can get that going, dude, you can do a lot with that. If you can't, it becomes a bit of a dicier proposition. So John's smart enough, I think, to come up with a game plan to maximize all of his strengths if and when that fight happens.
I love that.
And also Adesanya. Adesanya will also, you know, that's why that fight is so intriguing, dude, because you guys know I'm as high as you are on Adesanya, so I would want to see what he has cooking in the laboratory too.
Well, I'll tell you what, mentioning that, I mean, we talk about this fight, but if you look at it, it'll be Adesanya versus Romero, Adesanya versus Costa, Adesanya versus Till or Cannonier before we get to that fight. That's a lot of fun for us to have, guys, with Adesanya showing us what he's made of before this John Jones fight happens. And you wouldn't say that about any champion except for a guy like Adesanya, who might be able to get all that done in a calendar year and then turn around to fight John Jones possibly in a stadium in Australia. But that is an absolutely unreal fact because he has a line of absolute killers in front of him. It's not, you know, it's not the light heavyweight division where you've got some tough guys, absolute killers. So it's going to be fascinating to see what we even learn about Adesanya and what kind of stuff he's able to do before he gets to that John Jones fight. But Luke, we have been greedy with our time, so we want to thank you for coming on. Guys, make sure to follow Luke at L Thomas News on Twitter. Of course, the Morning Combat airs every Monday, 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. That's Tuesday here in Australia. The Luke Thomas live chat. The Luke Thomas Show on SiriusXM is now available worldwide. That's here in Australia on Apple Podcasts and Pandora. Selected highlights, not the full show, but we're so excited to be able to check that out outside of the US and here in Australia, New Zealand. And you have a ton of fans, Luke. And of course, guys, make sure to check out UFC 247 this weekend. That is it from us. You can't break it down any better. Luke, thank you so much. Can't wait to see what happens this weekend.
Thank you, boys. Have fun. Take care.